நான் அட்மிட் ஆல் கொடுத்துருவா சுந்தரையா. வந்துட்டே இருக்காங்க. நீங்க மியூட்ல இருக்கீங்க.
2 minutes. அது லைவ் சொன்ன
லைவ் லிங்க்
இன்னும்
எடுத்து
எல்லாரும் பேச ஆரம்பிச்சிட்டாங்க, அதெல்லாம் ரெக்கார்ட் ஆகும்.
மெயில் போயிடுச்சுன்னா நீங்க நான் இப்போ லிங்கே ஷேர் பண்ணிக்கிறேன், லைவ் லிங்க்.
ஓகே,
லிங்க் ஃபர்ஸ்ட் ஷேர் பண்ணுங்க சுபு. அவங்க பாமா வந்து போட்டுருவாங்க.
அந்த சாட்ல போட்டிருக்கேன் சார்.
எடுத்துட்டேன் சுபு. தேங்க் யூ.
ஓகே, நன்றி.
ஆரம்பிச்சலாமா?
நீங்க ஆரம்பிச்சிருங்க. நீங்க லைவ் எல்லாத்தையும் அட்மிட் பண்ணிடலாங்க.
பண்ணிட்டேன். இன்னும் ஒரு 5 நிமிஷம் இருக்குயா, வெயிட் பண்ணுவோமா?
சரி, 5 நிமிஷம் வெயிட் பண்ணுவோம்.
நான் இந்த குரூப்ல போட்டுறேன்.
சரிங்க.
Hello.
வணக்கம் ஐயா.
Hello to everyone.
ஹலோ.
ஹலோ.
Yeah, hi, hi, sir. வணக்கம் சார். உங்களுக்காக தான் வெயிட் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கோம்.
நானும் உங்களுக்காக தான் வெயிட் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கிறேன்.
We are pretty excited, sir. What a beautiful contribution. Wonderful.
நிறைய பண்ண வேண்டியிருக்கு. நிறைய a lot of research is yet to be done ன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். That is what I think. Lot of open questions.
Exactly. Actually, last week I was talking to Professor Pichappan. அவர் எனக்கு சீனியர் தான். அவரு பிச்சப்பட்ட பேசிட்டு இருந்தேன். I'm trying to link a girl from South Korea. ஆனா தமிழ் பொண்ணு தான். அது வந்து அங்க PhD பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கு. அவளுக்கு இந்த மாதிரி ஜீனோமிக்ஸ்ல பண்ணணும், சம்திங் டிஃப்ரெண்ட். எல்லாரும் திரும்பவே கல்ச்சுரலே பண்ணிட்டு இருக்காங்க. I said, okay, let's connect you with the MKU அப்படின்ட்டு அதில் அந்த டேட்டா மைனிங் பண்ணி அந்த கொரியன்ஸ் அண்ட் தமிழ் ஆட்களோட லிங்க் பண்ண முடியுமா அப்படின்ட்டு. அதில் பிச்சுப்பின் ஒரு இன்ட்ரெஸ்டிங் பாயிண்ட் சொன்னார். அதாவது என்னன்னா, நான் சொன்னேன் பாண்டியா லீனியேஜில் வரக்கூடிய தமிழர்களையும் அங்கே கிம் கிளான் அவங்களுடைய இதையும் பார்த்தா தான் வந்து யூ see the links. ஏன்னா அவங்க 2 பேரும் தான் they claim that they are linked அப்படின்னா. அவர் சொன்னாரு, தமிழ்நாட்டுல ரொம்ப சிக்கல் என்னன்னா, இப்ப பாண்டியா கிளான்னா அப்ப அவங்களுக்கு வந்து ஈஸியா கிம் கிளான் இருக்கு, நம்மளுக்கு ஜாதி வாரியா புரிஞ்சிருக்காரு. ஸோ அவர் என்ன சொன்னாரு, நம்ம நாடார போய் பார்க்கணும், இல்லாட்ட சில தலித் ஜாதிகள்ல பார்க்கணும். அந்த மாதிரி we need to target and then go and collect samples அப்படிங்கிற மாதிரி ஒரு இன்ட்ரெஸ்டிங் பாயிண்ட் சார். அது தமிழ்நாட்டுல இந்த மாதிரி I think it's only Pichappan was done that. ஜாதி வாரியா வந்து ஜீனோமிக்ஸ் பண்ணது.
No, that seemed to be common with other scholars too. India, they seem to classify them based on caste and religion too, to some extent. But I think that is embedded in the Indian culture. Indian thinking is that way. It looks like it. But I think it's a very common thing because yara paathumna unga endha oorunu kepanga. That is an indirect question as to what person you are.
I know.
So just in the talk itself, that culture is embedded. I see my classmate Rajaram Bhatt. Hi Rajaram, how are you doing? He's muted.
Hi Muthu.
Hey, how are you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good. Look forward to your feedback and comments.
Sure.
Raj,
நீங்க ஆரம்பத்துல இந்த கொஸ்டின்ஸ் நான் ஒரு சில நிமிடம் இன்ட்ரோடியூஸ் பண்ண உடனே நீங்க ஆரம்பிங்க. நீங்களே போன தடவை பதிவு பண்ண மாதிரி கொஸ்டின்ஸ் இருக்கு, ஏற்கனவே வந்த கொஸ்டின்ஸ் ஒன்னொன்னா சொல்லி நீங்க பதில் சொல்லிட்டு மீதி ஏதாவது கேள்வி இருந்தா கேட்கற மாதிரி அவங்க பாமா மாடரேட் பண்றோம்.
So the way I have organized this is for about 10-12 minutes I have summarized some of those questions. There was one or two major questions that kept coming up and again. So I have a few slides to provide some background to that and then let people ask questions. So I need about 12, 15 minutes first, and then we'll open it up for a discussion.
மாமா
Sir,
நீங்க
you can start, sir. Go ahead, sir. Please start.
Yeah.
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். இந்த கேள்வி பதில் நிகழ்ச்சிக்கு உங்களை வரவேற்பதில் எனக்கு பெருமகிழ்ச்சி. ஜேஓசி ஜேர்னி ஆஃப் சிவிலைசேஷன் இண்டஸ் வைகை அப்படிங்கிற தலைப்புல நாங்க அந்த புத்தகத்தை, அருமையான புத்தகத்தை ஆங்கிலம் தமிழ் ரெண்டுலையும் படித்தோம். மாணவர்களுக்கு அமெரிக்காவில் உள்ள தமிழ் படிக்கும் மாணவர்களுக்கும் தமிழ் கல்ச்சரை பத்தி, வரலாறை பத்தி தெரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்கு வாய்ப்பு கிடைக்கும்ட்டு நிறைய வாரங்கள் படித்தோம். ஆங்கில புத்தகம் வந்தது பின்னாடி தான் வந்தது, படித்தோம். அதன் பிறகு முக்கியமா நம்ம இந்த குடும்பம் ஒன்று ஜேஓசி குடும்பம் அப்படின்னு போச்சு கருத்துக்கள் பரிமாறிக்கிட்டோம். அதுல முடிஞ்ச அளவுக்கு நம்ம எவிடன்ஸ் பேஸ்ட், சயின்ஸ் பேஸ்ட் கருத்துக்கள் வரணும் அப்படிங்கிறது தான். அந்த இதுல முக்கியமாக நவம்பர் 23 ஜெனட்டிக் ஹெரிட்டேஜ் ஆஃப் கரண்ட் டே தமிழ்ஸ் அப்படின்னு ப்ரொஃபசர் ராஜ் முத்தரசன் பேசினாங்க. அதுக்கு அப்பவே கேள்வி வந்தது, அதுக்கு பிறகும் கேள்வி வந்தது. அப்போ அந்த நேரம் ரொம்ப அதிகமா போயிட்டா அது சயின்ஸ் பேஸ்டுங்கிறதுனால கொஞ்சம் சிக்கலாயிரும். அப்படிங்கிறதுனால இந்த கேள்வி நிகழ்ச்சியை இன்றைக்கு வச்சுக்கலாம் அப்படின்ட்டு நாங்கள் வச்சிருக்கிறோம். அந்த உரை அது யூடியூப்ல அவைலபிள். அந்த உரையை மறுபடியும் கேளுங்க, மறுபடியும் இந்த கேள்வி பதில். இது பியூர் சயின்ஸ் பேஸ்டுங்கிறதுனால மைட்டோகாண்ட்ரியல் டிஎன்ஏ, ஒய் குரோமோசோம் கூட ஒரு பேசிக் இன்ட்ரடக்ஷன் கொடுத்தா நல்லா இருக்கும்னு நினைக்கிறேன். இந்த அளவில் நான் முடிச்சுக்கிட்டு நம்ம ப்ரொஃபசர் ராஜ் முத்தரசன் அவர்களை தொடர கேட்டுக்கிறேன். வணக்கம்.
Thank you, Arasa. Appreciate it. And I'm going to be speaking in English because I see my classmate Ashley and Rajaram have joined. They're not Tamil speakers. I also know there are a few others are joining. So I hope you'll bear with me in speaking completely in English. That way it'll have hopefully a farther reach. So the way I have organized this is to provide some background. Arasu mentioned that he wants a little bit of background, sort of a review. Before, when you meet with students in a tutorial session, you quickly review what you had lectured and then you allow questions to come about. So I'm thinking about it somewhat in an analogous format. The purpose is really to clarify and make it a little easier to understand. So, and I will try to answer as best as I can based on my knowledge. And that, I should warn you, is limited because this is not my specialty. This is something that I've acquired an interest in over the years. And I have a little bit of background in genetic engineering, but not to the extent that many of the scholars in this field work in. So this is my title sheet that essentially contains the phases of since this is a journey of civilization from Indus to Vaiha, which is a hypothesis Balaya has been working on for many, many years and has published a book. And this talk emerges out of that study session, if you will. So the context of my talk is really oriented towards IVC to some extent and Tamil in special. So the orientation is that. And I want people who have not been engaged in this particular study circle to recognize that. And I'm sort of oriented in that direction for that very purpose, to discover or to illuminate or bring to the fore what does the data say in terms of journey of an Indus civilization to Vaihe. There are some people think that Tamil people actually came from Indus Valley. And of course, Tamil was, there are some theories about the language that is spoken about Indus Valley and the like. So, and I would like to request you to have an open mind and think about what the evidence tells us rather than forming an opinion and then look for data that supports that. So coming from a scientific field, I prefer to go by what the evidence says. There are many, many different kinds of evidences. The one Balaya has done is the toponymics. That is, when you travel from one place to another, you tend to name those places based on what you are already familiar with, use terms that you're already familiar with, etc. And also he provides literary evidences. There are also archaeological evidences. My orientation today is purely genetic. although linguistic is of interest, we won't get there because that's a very large topic. So in this title slide, what you see are the faces of Indus Valley civilization that have been acquired from various excavations. As I had mentioned last time, they don't look anything like what we look like, most of us look like. They were obviously of a very ancient population. At the bottom are the pictures of faces of people that I took pictures of. Most of them are south of Kaveri. I've explored a lot of little villages in old ancient Pandya country and also in that region. And I can give you a conversation about them. I won't get there. The most interesting conversation I had was with this gentleman. He was he was trying to sell honey. He was carrying a bucket of honey with him and he wanted to buy. So we were traveling, and so we were willing to give him money, but he didn't accept the money at all. And he was such an honest person. It was impressive to see that honesty, having been in Chennai for such a long time. This kind of traditions are germane to the non-urban population. It is urban population that is very different. But anyway, that's beside. This is my sort of quick outline. I'm going to summarize quickly, as Arasu required, some heritage markers, some background. Common Y haplogroup and mitochondrial DNA, these are two markers that we use. And I'll go a little bit in depth here, a little bit more than what I did last time. Not on the science of it, but what the data shows, what is the evidence shows. And then the common questions that emerged during the last and subsequent to the last lecture. And I'll get into each one of them. But the first one, the Aryan Dravidian, who is a Tamil, who is not a Tamil, that will sort of be discussed right through using genetic evidences, if you will. So that will run right through. The others, I'll have specific slides that answer that. And then a quick summary of Indus Valley Civilization results of Shinde and et al. Paper of 2019, because it's a very important paper. I would urge you to read that as much as you can. It's not very difficult to understand. I'll highlight what I had highlighted before with a little bit more additional information and then open up for discussions and answering questions. Going backwards. Okay, there are really two markers. One that passes through father to son. The other one is from mother to all of her children, both male and female, called mitochondrial DNA. Y is a paternal line marker. Mitochondrial DNA is a maternal line marker. This is what we use to determine ancestry, if you will. Now, within this, people do report papers based on sort of a rough and tumble analysis, which is sort of an average measure. And there are people who do very fine work looking into a great deal of detail. We have both of those kinds of papers in the literature. So you have to be careful when you read the literature in this space. And of course, I'll talk a little bit more about the other two boxes that I have. Okay. What I did was I took this very large Y haplogroup that's available at YSOP, the nonprofit organization that sort of charts out all the Y haplogroup reported in the literature. And it's a huge chart, you can imagine. I've oversimplified it and created the chart, which will focus primarily on, that'll be relevant to Indians and Tamils, if you will, Dravidians, if you will. And so the people who came from Africa were labeled as CT, haplogroup C, and out of that came CM130. And I think I showed you, we met Mr. Virumandi, who harbors that particular haplogroup CM130. And those were the first people to have come into India. They also went up further into the north and all of that, into the Russia and also all the way up to Mongolia region. But they came down south, and of course we found him. He was discovered by Professor Pichappan and Stephen Wells near Madurai Theni. And there are many variants of that is subsequent mutants of CM130, C1, C2, C4, C5. There are a whole ton of them. Many of them are found in India. C5, for example, you'll find them in tribal population in India. So we shouldn't think about only CM130 as the original inhabitants. These guys, C5, emerged probably within a few thousand years after that, 70,000 years ago. So they're also present in India, and I'll show some slides to provide evidence of that. And then out of CM130, out of CT, which is the original inhabitants, D emerged. DM174, those were the people Dr. Thangaraj discovered in the Andaman Islands. D1A3, there are various versions of them. And the CT also gave rise to F, M89, outside of India, but they came into India and they literally spawned a whole series of people, for example, H and then K, and you see them in India, and of course R in Central Asia, etc. All the places where I have highlighted in red or green are relevant to us. I'll just point out one thing. FM89, although its origin goes back outside of India, they seem to be present its subclades are present primarily in the Indian population. And similarly, HM69, it's a prominent South Asian lineage. You find a fair amount of them in tribal population in India and also in the tribal population in Gujarat. And that I would highlight when I get to it. L, we spoke a lot about L, which is supposedly one of the haplogroups of Indus Valley civilization. There were many others, as I had pointed out last time. And then the R comes into two major categories. R1A, which are labeled as Aryan. Please note that R1A is an Aryan marker. R2 is related to R, but how they came into India, we don't have strong evidence, but Spencer Wells had speculated, this is almost 10 years ago, that they came via Tibet and then into the Gangetic Valley and then into India. That is supposed to have taken place over 10 or 15,000 years ago. We don't have strong evidence for it. We have only opinions on that. But you find R2 only in India, and you find them in plenty in the southern part of India. So I have also included on the left-hand side what people have estimated as when those haplogroups emerged. Okay, let me go on to now mitochondrial. This is a very complex structure. I don't want you to focus on the details. The main thing to remember out of this slide, which came out of the 1000 Genome Project, and there are many people who looked at the data and sort of analyzed it to many different extent. And I shared with you the results that was done at Georgia Tech. This one is from a group in England. The key thing to remember is in India, we primarily see haplogroup M, R, and U predominantly in the decreasing proportion. And at almost no N, we do see a little bit of N. And most importantly, the U is a subclade. It derives from M, and that is that lady that was discovered at Rakhigarhi. And M2 is considered by the scholars as the oldest. And according to this particular scholar, that is dated to something like about 60,000, 50,000 or so. Many scholars have labeled it as 70,000. So there is a debate. This is not fixed number. 10,000 years this way or that way at that old an age is sort of an approximation in this field. So we have to take that with a pinch of salt. But the most important thing I want you to focus on is this set of authors organized the mitochondrial data based on number density. They colored them as red for south, meaning south of the Deccan, and the green for central part of India, and east, like Assam and Bangladesh, as blue, and the west in the amber color. And you'll notice there's a fairly substantial portion of red in this, which suggests there's a fair number of people in South India, south of Deccan, belong to haplogroup M. And of course, there are others who are also present. It's also a heavily populated area other than the Gangetic region, right? The key thing that I wanted to point out is how U, which is a subclade within from R, goes down to, its origin goes back to actually Southwest Asia, outside. And the lady that was discovered at Rakhigarhi really is part of that haplogroup. But there are some U haplogroups that are found only in India, subclades that are found only in India, not elsewhere outside of. We won't get into the details of that, but the purpose of this is to point out that M is a dominant mitochondrial, and R, these are native to India. Very little from outside seem to have come in. There is a very nice paper that discusses how the founding mitochondrial DNA are primarily native to India. That takes you into another kind of a discussion, but I'll just go point out one particular one, M2. 100% of Kurma, Uralic Kurma, they are in the Nilgiri district. 100% of them belong to M2. And Todas, 3/4 of them belong to this haplogroup, another tribal group in the Nilgiri district, and of course Kurumba and Kuruba, and they are at a much decreasing one. Irregular is about 5%, but their Y haplogroup tends to be more ancient in this category. I'll get into that further. Now, I also asked a question about mutation rate of mitochondrial DNA compared to Y. Because it's a smaller molecule, it mutates at a greater rate. It's about 10 times more, is what the literature says. There are many different, these are, by the way, estimates, they're not precise numbers. People have attempted to do experiments in them, but there are some data available using not humans, but using other cultures, and they seem to indicate approximately a 10-fold increase in mutation rate of M. So we expect lot more subclades of M in India. Some of them are yet to be discovered, by the way. What I reported on that is as of 2017. In the last 7 years, there might have been a lot more available. Now, endogamy, how do you determine whether somebody has only married within self? And I think I had a little chart earlier on. When somebody marries within the same community, their chromosomal part tends to be same. They seem to collect the same amount of information. There are metrics people in this field use known as runs of homozygosity, which is, now I don't want to get too much into detail, which is what is the length of the chromosome that is the same between two individuals. Now, if you're highly married within the same community, that tends to manifest itself. And similarly, another term that is used is genetic diversity. How different is a person's genome compared to another person? There are some statistical ways, mathematical ways of trying to quantify that. It's a mathematical definition, I wanted to say. And so if a person uses different parameters, different loci on a chromosome, they'll come up with a slightly different answer. So you have to be careful about when you read this data in the literature. And the other one is the number of single nucleotide polymorphism. That's again an identity, like a fingerprint on a chromosome, and looking at how different it is between two genomes, etc. But those are the kind of metrics people use. And I think I'll give you a sense of what it means. Now, those of you who are mathematically oriented would mean this is a dimensional, it's not a three-dimensional problem, not a two-dimensional problem. It's a dimension is in the orders of tens of thousands. And now what mathematically has been, people have attempted to do is to reduce that into either 2, 3, or 4 dimensions and then reduce it to 2 dimensions. That way you and I can look at it in a figure and try to relate to it. So this is a mathematical treatment of the genomes of different community groups plotted on a 2-dimensional plot. The purpose of this is if they're all falling on the same point, they're genetically homogeneous, meaning they're uniform, they're same. There is hardly any distinction. So this author, in this particular case, I think Reich is the first author. A collaborator in this is Tangaraj as well. And on the right-hand side are the various population groups within India. Left hand are the green one are the Europeans. Right hand are the Chinese. Chinese are very homogeneous genetically. Now, all the dots you see on top are the various Indian communities. This is one way you can show that these communities are so different. Now, if one of those dots fall closer to the Chinese end of the spectrum or the European end of the spectrum, you could say they're more Chinese-like, if you will, the green spots, that's East Asian effect. on the other hand, people of Kashmiri Pandit, they're more towards the left top. This is over here, Kashmiri Pandits. They're more closer to European. And of course, the distance is very large too. So this is a plot to give you an indication that we are a heterogeneously homogeneous population, Indians meaning. So this is unique to the Indian population, and Professor Raik was interested in this because this is very unique. It doesn't exist in the rest of the world, literally rest of the world. It exists in Sri Lanka too. And therefore, he was fascinated by this. And so he collaborated with Dr. Thangaraj and created this wonderful manuscript. But anyway, now I get to one of the questions N. Subramanian asked during the last encounter. He asked a question, how can I connect the genes to the sculpture? I heard it as culture, not sculpture. I think what he might have thought is because I showed many negroidal features. So this is an answer to that question. Professor Porschel had taken skeletons and analyzed them by the dimensions of the distance between the thickness of the forehead and the top to bottom, etc. And then he looked at the skull features of Africans and discovered that these folks that were here in Indus Valley, it was in, Chanudaro, which is one of the Indus Valley sites, came from southeastern part of Africa. So he connects them to that. And of course, he speculated certain agricultural products came there and contributed to farming in Indus Valley. He doesn't provide evidence for that, but he does connect the sculptural feature, the skull features to that particular part of Africa. Remember, Africans are also a very diverse population. They come in very different skull structures. So he was able to do this. And that paper is available and it's freely available. You may want to consider downloading and looking into it. Now I'm going to give you examples to try to answer right through the talk, this Aryan Dravidian type of an argument. Now this paper came out looking at the tribal population of Gujarat. I picked this paper because I have a link at the bottom. You can download it. I think it's freely available. And looking at what their heritage is on the left hand, it's about 280 samples on the left hand side of the various tribal population that are present only in Gujarat. I picked Gujarat because Gujarat is close to Indus Valley. The thought was they might be more closely related to Indus Valley. That's my thinking. Now, the key information to find out, to note this, 54% of them, that is over here, I could count the 27 in R2 into that category, were non-Vedic people, that is pre-Vedic, pre-2000 BCE people. That is, they were native to India before the Aryans came in. On the other hand, 53 out of the 284, which is about 20%, 1/5 of them, have an Aryan descent. So the tribal population in Gujarat, 1/5 of them have a tribal population. You find this property if you move further into Madhya Pradesh too, but you don't see it to this extent in South India. That's something for people who are interested in movement of people. Now, the purpose of this slide is really to point out that the culture of Aryan and Dravidian or native people is actually a blended culture, even in the tribal population. And now, this was a study out of the 1000 Genome Project. And I showed a part of this in my talk. And this is the whole talk, that was the whole slide out of Georgia Tech. The key point I want us to focus is Indians, which is this block, which is M and N, and this is U, and this is Europe. And of course, they have a fair amount of U, but it's not the same U sub-haplogroup. And so there is U origin is somewhere outside of India, but the Rakhigargi lady was of U 2B, I think, something like that. Yeah, it is a subclade of U. But you do see this U in India, all the way in the middle of India than in South India. but primarily we see M and N. So the main story from this slide is there's an overlap with the Europeans. There's a commonality, but that commonality goes back to a very ancient time. And then this is the Raki Gargi study coming out of Shinde as the first author. The key point to remember in this, which I pointed out before, is the people of Raki Gargi, at least from that one genomic study, were really hunter-gatherers from Iran, not farmers from Iran, and a combination of some ancient people that the authors took Andamanese as a model, and it is a combination of those two. And then they show in the paper that people in India have some commonality with the Andamanese people. So they also argue that this lady is sort of a representative of people who are in South Asia. And he goes on to note that, which comes out in the next slide, that they had little or no ancestry to the Fertile Crescent contribution. That is, the thought is the farming was invented in the Fertile Crescent, that is up way in the Euphrates, Tigris Valley. But there is no genetic connection between this particular lady and that region where farming was invented. So they were suggesting the farming was probably invented by the people in Indus Valley by themselves. And of course, there is some evidence from another site just a few hundred kilometers due west of Indus Valley, Mergar, I think, which was an early version of Indus Valley, where there is a blend, and they seem to have gotten into farming. So that seemed to support it, but that question is probably still a little bit open. Finally, another important point is he tracks the pathway of the Vedic people all the way from Central Asia, and that comes on the next slide. This is an important slide which I put together so that it's more illustrative. It is a combination of many different researchers, including Professor Reich's work. It's adapted from Professor Reich's work. The emergence of ancient genome, which is the Yamnia culture, really gave insight to a lot of information, and the ancient genome data coming to the fore after 2017 really enabled that to pinpoint the pathway of the there are other things they did, but I'm going to focus only on the path, the folks that who came into India. They came out of Yamnia culture. They interacted with a culture in this region around 1700 BCE. By the way, there is genetic evidence for this R1A there. That's why they plotted in this way. And then came into northern part of Iran. They don't go to the plateau of Iran, which was the thought process prior to this study, prior to the availability of ancient genome. And then they come through Hindu Kush into Indus Valley. So they followed literally Alexander the Great's pathway, if you will. So they didn't come through. Previously, people thought they came through this way and then into India. That was not the case. They came through Hindu Kush region, literally bypassing Italian or rather Iranian plateau. That's an important, and now this is based on genetic evidence. It is not because they have evidences from BMAC, which is an important area where there's a fair amount of ancient genome have been discovered, and that enabled us to pinpoint the pathway. But of course, later on, they did get into this area. The important thing I want to point out, those of you into history, is the same path. They also went this way into Mitanni. And those of you who have read about Mitanni letters would appreciate that particular point, because Mitanni letters invoke Vedic gods. And of course, there are all kinds of theories about it. Prior to, even now, there are people in India who will talk about how these gods, Vedic gods from here went there. That wasn't the case. That was an entirely different trajectory of those people. And of course, in the Mitanni letters, the Vedic gods are celebrated in the prologue for the letter that he writes to the Pharaoh of Egypt. So that's something that those of you into history would like to look into. Now, finally, to Professor Pichappan's work, it's an important work. and of course collaboration with Spencer Wells, and it was supported by National Geographic Society. This is something I used this before, but the key thing that I want to point out here is the argument was the Aryan Dravidian came into, but this was towards the end of my talk, and so I rushed through this. The point to remember is if you were to take some of the tribal communities, they dominate with FM89. These were people whose heritage goes back to the haplogroup C, who the original inhabitants of India, and they mutated. The mutated version of them is the direct descendants of them is FM89, and they came into India. They also went elsewhere too, but the ones that came into India are in the tribal population. I showed that the Gujarat tribal population has this at a fair number as well. So what do you find in Tamil Nadu and what do you find in Gujarat, in the tribal population? There's some similarity. And of course, in the another hill tribe, it is H1. And of course, they also have, I want to point out, R1A1, which is the Aryan marker. So the Aryan marker in this particular hill tribe is about 1%. Here it's about as much as about 15%. So a hill tribe is also has an Aryan descent, just like others have Aryan descent. So the key thing to remember is the Aryan and Dravidian are not binary. It's really multiple ranges. A person may be of high Aryan descent or low Aryan descent. So now you can look at the gene expressions and look at what percentage of those genes come from one versus the other. That requires a much more detailed analysis that can be done, but I have not run into them. But there are agencies that will do that if you were to send a sample, though. Now, the other one that I wanted to point out is H1, that is dominant in this hill tribe, which is at the border of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. And the other point I want to point out among scheduled castes, 1/10 of scheduled castes in Tamil Nadu belong to are of Aryan descent. So when you look at a scheduled caste, you could 10% chance you'll be correct if you called him as an Aryan, right? Similarly, on the other hand, for example, the dryland farmers, there are various different kinds. You know, the common groups, Yadavas and Vanyas, etc. 24% of them are a KM9, which is much more directly related to India and Tamil Nadu, by the way. And also you find an R1, almost 10% in that farming community too. So the first one, Aryan or Dravidian, sort of answers, these slides answers this to the extent that most of us have blended to some extent. Some tend to be more of Aryan descent than of Dravidian descent. If you were to call all those folks prior to entry of R1A as Dravidian, right? So this is the same story, if you will. I don't need to, I'll stop there. That way I don't take too much of your time so I can answer your questions. Okay, let's stop there.
Thank you, Aya, for this presentation. Maybe we now go to the Q&A session. Whomever has the question, you can raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask the question. There is a raise hand button in the Zoom app. You can use that. We can go one after the other. தமிழ்ல கேள்வி இருந்தாலும் கேளுங்க, நம்ம பேசி ஐயா சொல்லுவாங்க பதில். And more importantly, let's be focused to the topic here. Let's be precise with our questions, make it concise, and please.
ஐயா வணக்கங்க, திருச்சியிலிருந்து பாலா பாரதி.
வணக்கம்.
ஐயா எனக்கு ஒரு கேள்வி இருக்கு. அந்த ஜுவாலபுரம் அப்படின்னு சொல்லி அந்த டைம் சொன்னாங்க இல்லையா, பிஃபோர் அந்த எரிமலை வெடிப்புக்கு முன்னாடி மக்கள் இருந்த பின்னாடி சொல்லி.
Yes, that is supposed to be something like 70,000 years ago.
ஐயா கேக்குதுங்களா?
கேக்குதுங்க, நீங்க சொல்லுங்க.
மன்னிக்கணும், நான் இடையில கொஞ்சம் ப்ராப்ளம். நான் மறுபடியும் கேக்குதுங்களா?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes. கேளுங்க.
சாரி, இடையில ஒரு கால் வந்தது. அந்த ஜுவாலபுரம் பீப்புள் வந்து அந்த அந்த எரிமலை வெடிப்புக்கு முன்னாடி இருந்தாங்க, பின்னாடி இருந்தாங்கன்னு சொன்னாங்க. அந்த டைம் பீரியடை பத்தி கொஞ்சம் கிளாரிட்டி கொடுங்க. அது எந்த மக்கள், அந்த சிடியா சியா, அதுன்னு கொஞ்சம் விளக்கம் முடிஞ்ச. நன்றி.
The entry into India according to the scholars, is about 70,000 years ago, which is after the explosion, or rather the volcanic expression. And I think in one of the slides that was on the small letters, so you might not have seen it. So it's all after that large volcanic expansion. Eruption, if you will. So the background to the many of the todas goes back to literally 60,000 years ago. Now, by the way, they also have, I don't know whether I had that slide here. I might have that here somewhere.
You had it in the last presentation.
Yeah, here is these are todas. I visited them about 2 years ago at their own tribal population capital. And they vary quite considerably. And this gentleman here wearing blue lungi is the son of the tribal chief. He's the one I communicated with. You have to have sort of permission to go into their village. And there was a good friend who made that arrangement for us. And now, do I have that? Yeah, here it is. That is a different population. They also have, I don't know whether it's in probably, this particular slide. Todas are here. Toda, he spells it as Toda. You'll find them having 38% J2A. Now, J2 is typically associated with people in the Middle East. And there is although there is no discussion of it in the paper, J2A1 would be, for example, Mesopotamian. Is that because they came, J2 was part of Indus Valley, and they also picked up those heritage from there before they came down to Nilgiris in Tamil Nadu? That would be anybody's guess. So that stood out in Professor Pichayappan's paper. It is the only community that has a high J2 A1. So they are sort of unique in that respect. They have a Mid-Eastern, Mid-East heritage compared to the other characteristic they have. They have a little bit of C, something like 8%, and 10% of H1, H haplogroup. They also have a 11% of Aryan marker too. I hope that answers your question, Bala.
Yeah, I think so. பாலா, உங்களுக்கு தேவையான பதில் கிடைச்சிருச்சுன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். சுந்தர சோழன் ஐயா, நீங்க அன்மியூட் பண்ணிட்டு you can ask your question.
Thank you. This was a very wonderful session. In fact, I missed the earlier session, so that I regret. It was very informative. I have 3 questions. Probably, if time permits, you may answer them. Now, the first question is mentioning about R1A1. I hope this is the haplogroup what we are talking about. I'm not, very an expert on this. I understand. I got it right. Now, my question is, all the scholars are talking about 2 waves of Aryan immigration into India. Even Asko Parpala is talking about that. My only question is whether this kind of genomic studies or DNA studies have established any difference between these 2 waves of Aryan immigrations into India. That is my first question. Second question.
Before you go to second question, could you please clarify the question? You said between 2. Which are the 2? One is, could you please say that again?
What I understand is there was 2 waves of Aryan immigration into Indian subcontinent. if that is true, whether this genomic study points to any difference between the descendants of first wave of immigration and the descendants of say second wave of immigration. Is there any such markers?
Okay. The only data that's available from genomic perspective is the arrival, the trajectory of R1A1 into India, and approximately the time that it is now fairly somewhat for certain 1500 BCE into Indus region via BMAC, which is the bacteria region of Northwest. Now, that migration could have been in multiple forms. Maybe first a few families came and then a few people came, then more people came, more people. That is a possibility. But there is no timing of those. If there was, that I'm not aware of. Okay, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so probably what I can understand is there is no genomic markers to differentiate the descendants of first wave of immigration and the second wave of immigration. Am I correct, sir?
That would be correct. The reason is the markers for R1A1 takes place over thousands of years, but not in hundreds of years. Now, your question raises another one. Now, if you're able to sample and do a very detailed genomic analysis, you might be able to answer the question whether they came in single wave or multiple waves. That type of a work, I'm not aware of anything having been done. That requires different kind of approach to genomics. People have been focused much more on trying to make these measurements in a rough and tumble way rather than the refined way is extremely an expensive process to make those measurements.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Can I pass on to the second question?
Please.
Yeah. The spread of Indo-Aryan languages into the Indian subcontinent, that is being related to the spread of Aryans whom we call as having steppe ancestry and all that. Is that matching, or is there any gaps in that?
No, there's no quarrel about the language having been brought by the folks of R1A1. The reason is there's a very long linguistic connectivity between those people from Central Asia all the way into Europe. So there is no quarrel about that. They brought that rich language into India.
As far as Indian continent is subcontinent is concerned, that's what I have read. That it also explains the spread of people with steppe ancestry from northwest of India to the east of India. My idea is to know more about from the Indian subcontinent to the steppe region. So it justifies that spread of Indo-Aryan languages. My understanding is right, sir?
Maybe I don't think I understood that well. So could you mind stating it more direct, please?
Okay, it is my problem. Sorry. So
no, that's okay.
Indians,
let me see whether I can get at this better. The folks,
you're an expert. I'm a novice, so that problem is there.
No. Don't worry about it. This is not uncommon. If you're talking about a subject that you're not very familiar with, that's not uncommon. Anyway, the folks who came in brought their language with them. And the linguists argue, this is one of the bullet points that was included in a Shinde paper, when a language has an impact into a place where there are lots of people, there must be a large motion of people, large number of people must have come in, is one argument linguists make. So that language came into India, and of course, there were people there already speaking some other language. And of course, many of us speculate it might be some language that is related to Dravidian language group. And these two interacted, and as a consequence was born, this was somewhat established, many aspects of, now I'm getting into linguistics area, it's an area of my interest too. You see Dravidian language impact on Indo-Aryan language. For example, the way in Hindi, just to point this out, தமிழ்ல வந்து நான் பள்ளிக்கு போனேன்னு சொல்லுவோம், which is subject, object, verb. In Hindi, you'll say it exactly the same way. That syntax does not exist in Sanskrit. So even northern languages have adopted or adjudged, if you will, some of the characteristics of old Dravidian language. So what we have is, Professor Southwood has done a wonderful article, wonderful book, as well as McAlpin. He looks at Marathi and Gujarati, how the linguistic features of those have Dravidian language influence. And so, so that influence is there. So that's another evidence for trajectory of the language speakers from Indus Valley into Tamil Nadu, if you will. And there are similar arguments with respect to Sanskrit and Munda language, which belongs to the eastern part. And there is an interaction due to that. One example I'll immediately point out. In Munda language, Ganga means river. And of course, it now is a river called Ganga, right? When you say Ganga River in Munda, it means river, right? Doesn't make sense. So there are linguistic influences that are omnipresent from people who existed in India 60, 70,000 years ago. I hope that sort of answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. And the third question, the very frequently used classification of ancient North Indian and ancient South Indian. And it was also mentioned in a specific book that, this was arrived at as a compromise kind of thing to identify the markers. Now, does it in any way obfuscate the identities and our historical lineages?
Well, those are new terms that really came into use in the last 10 or 15 years. So the ancient North Indian would I think it means related to more of an Aryan-centric R1A1 type of a genome, as opposed to ancient or rather South Indian would relate to something more closer to the other pre-Aryan type of gene. But they have a model for each one, and they use that to try to figure out the relationship. If you want to translate ancient North Indian and ancient South Indian, I think the term that was used in classical work, the scholarly work prior to something like about 2010 or something like that, would be Aryan and Dravidian. And that is also a rough and tumble arrangement, because if you look at genomically, India is really founded by current people of India occupied, draw their descent to four major genome. One is of course, the Aryan, the other one is the Dravidian, and then you add that the northern part, the Tibeto region, and then of course from the eastern part, when they moved into India, the eastern part. So you have these four major genomes, out of which Aryan and Dravidian being the dominant ones, which is what is used by the scholars. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, very thankful to you for a very detailed and helpful responses. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I have a request. Can we stop sharing so that I don't know whether for all the questions the slide might not be relevant, or you want to keep it? Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, I think there is some problem. Okay, then we move on to the next question. Ms. Daisy, you may ask your question.
Hi, Bama. Thank you, Dr. Bama. Dr. Raj, my question is about the Rakahidi burial. According to the archaeologist Amarnath, he states that the burial had shell bangles, I want to mention that, shell bangles and a golden chain. and which one has the R1A1 haplogroup. He's claiming that Dravidian heritage. So I think you answer a bit in Dr. Sundarachol's question, but I'd like to hear from you more. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. It was a she. She would not have a Y haplogroup. So she had a mitochondrial DNA haplogroup, as it was not in their paper, but that was available in other sources, which is U2B, the haplogroup U, which you find at about 5 or 10% in India, but that is not a dominant mitochondrial DNA. She might have been wearing bangles, shell bangles. I think that I recall reading, but I don't remember that precisely. I don't remember what she was wearing, and that is in the archaeological report, I think. You mentioned Cochin. I didn't quite get what it was.
Rakhi.
Oh, Rakhi, okay. But anyway, maybe my hearing is a little bit off. I heard Cochin. But since I heard it that way, I wanted to point out that there's an article that came up last year of Pattanam excavation. They call it as Pattanam rather than Pattinam, which yielded 12 skeleton. They couldn't do Y, but they did do mito, which is, by the way, in a slightly easier job laboratory-wise and also easy to extract. And they found half the population were of native Indians and half the population were more Europeans or Mediterranean. So it seemed to authenticate the people that lived in that particular region came for trade potentially from the Mideast, and of course there were people of Indian origin there too. And that was 100 BC to 180 CE, I think. It was in that time frame, not very ancient, but still 2,000 years ago.
Mr. Alagiri had some questions. He sent me in a private chat. ஐயா நீங்க இங்க கேட்கணும்னு நினைக்கிறீங்களா இல்ல நான் வாசிக்கவா அந்த கேள்விகள்?
நானே கேட்டுறேன்.
சரி.
ஐயாவுக்கு வணக்கம். என் பேர் அழகிரிசாமி. நான் வந்து என்னுடைய கேள்வி என்னன்னா, இப்போ திராவிட மொழிகள் பேசக்கூடிய தமிழ்நாடு, கர்நாடகா, ஆந்திரா மற்றும் மலையாளம் இந்த பகுதியில் இருக்கக்கூடிய மக்கள் ஒரே மாதிரியான ஹேப்லா குரூப்பை வச்சிருக்காங்களா அல்லது வந்து டிஃப்ரெண்ட் டைப்ஸ் ஆஃப் ஹேப்லா குரூப் இருக்கா?
இல்ல, டிஃப்ரெண்டா இருக்குது. ஏன் தெரியுமா? இங்க வந்து மக்கள் வந்து கிட்டத்தட்ட 70,000 ஆண்டுகளா இருந்திருக்காங்க. 70,000 நிறைய மியூட்டேஷன் நடந்திருக்கும். Many mutations would have occurred, and therefore ஒரே haplogroup இருக்காது இந்த regionல. That's why we have C, F, H, and of course J because of trade, L, and of course R, different versions of R. All of them are present in the Deccan and in Tamil Nadu also.
தமிழ்நாட்டில் predominant ஹேப்லா குரூப் என்ன ஆகுங்க?
இது வந்து நீங்க சாப்பிட்டீங்கன்னா எதுவும் சாப்பிட்டேன்னா சோறு சாப்பிட்டேன்னு சொல்லலாமா, அல்லது வந்து பருப்பு, அப்புறம் சாம்பார், அப்புறம் மீன் குழம்பு, அப்புறம் இது அந்த மாதிரி இந்த 4-5 விதமும் இருக்குது இல்லைங்களா? Because it looks like Tamil Nadu was occupied by humans for a long time, and during that long time the gene mutation takes place and you find varied versions of them, and they interacted to different extent with the different communities. Another, you have this collection of people with different heritage groups. Since this slide is up here, let me take the example of Irular. 36% of them is FM89. That heritage goes back to about something like 50 or 60,000 years ago. So the ancestors of this people who live in the hill tribe goes back 60,000 years ago. On the other hand, the people who have a heritage of R1A all the way across, some of us over here, 1% of them, no, 2.5% of them are R1A1. That heritage goes back only 3,500 years. Where is 3,500 years? Where is 50 or 60,000 years ago? They harbor the same ancestry in that particular community.
இந்த திராவிடன் லாங்குவேஜ் ஹேப்லோ குரூப்ஸ் நார்த் இந்தியாவிலேயே இருக்கிறதுக்கு வாய்ப்பு இருக்கா?
இருக்குங்க. Because, for example, you'll find, I think in the last talk I showed, 1/3 of Jat community. அது சொல்றதுக்கு முன்னாடி I want to say one thing. உங்க ஜீன்ஸும் நீங்க பேசுற மொழிக்கும் ஒருவித சம்பந்தமும் கிடையாது. For example, 1/3 of Jat community, they are in Rajasthan, belong to haplogroup L, and they are originally, they were there in Rajasthan before the Indo-Aryans came, because L is considered more closer to 3rd, 4th millennium BCE. So that's an ancient haplogroup. But for whatever reason, the language became Indo-Aryan. Rajasthani is Indo-Aryan. But there is a group within Rajasthan near Jaipur area. Their language contains linguistic features of Tamil. இது என்ன சொல்றீங்க? So there is a Dravidian language component in that particular type of Rajasthani they speak. So we have a blend. Just not only is there a blend of genes, but there is also a blend of languages too. I know நீங்க போன வாட்டி இருந்தீங்களா என்னன்னு தெரியல. I was speaking in that particular group. They call it as Jaipuri. I think they live just around Jaipur area. It's a small community of about 1 million people. நம்ம தமிழ்ல நாம் நாங்கள்னு சொல்லுவோம் இல்லையா? நாம்னா ரெண்டு பேரையும் சேர்த்துக்கிறது, நாங்கள்னா only இது ஆங்கிலத்துல எக்ஸ்க்ளூசிவிட்டின்னு சொல்லுவாங்க. You don't include the person you're speaking with or you include him. நாம் நாங்கள். இந்த feature Jaipuri languageல இருக்குது. But it's absent in Sanskrit, for example. So, but the language they speak is Indo-Aryan, but they have linguistic features that are very Dravidian. Now, this is just one example. The similar thing is in Marathi, it's in Gujarati, it's also in Old Kannada. So you can trace back that linguistic feature all the way from Indus region into Tamil Nadu.
ஜாட் கம்யூனிட்டியை பற்றி சொன்னீங்க. இப்போ அதுலேருந்து நான் என்ன புரிஞ்சுக்கிறேன்னா, இப்பொழுது திராவிட மொழிகளை மறந்து அவங்க இண்டோ ஆரியன் மொழிகளை பேசினாலும் கூட அவங்களுடைய திராவிடன் ஆரிஜின் அவங்களுடைய ஹேப்லா குரூப் இருக்கு அப்படின்னு நான் புரிஞ்சுக்கலாமா? சரிதானா?
சொல்றது கரெக்ட். நீங்க இங்க அமெரிக்க வாழ் தமிழர்கள் இருக்காங்க இல்லையா, இன்னொரு 10 ஜெனரேஷன் அவங்களுக்கு தமிழ்லாம் தெரியாதுன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். இது என்னுடைய ஒப்பீனியன். அவங்க இங்க இருக்க இங்கிலீஷ்ல தான் பேசுவாங்க. அண்ட் ஆனா அவங்களுடைய ஜீன்ஸ் இந்தியாவில் இருக்க ஜீன்ஸ் தமிழன் ஜீன்ஸா இருக்கும், எல்லா இருக்கலாம் அல்லது ஹெச்சா இருக்கலாம் இல்லையா? ஸோ த லாங்குவேஜ் யூ ஸ்பீக் அண்ட் யுவர் ஜெனடிக் ஹெரிட்டேஜ் மே or may not be connected. அதுக்கு இதுக்கும் சம்பந்தம் டெஃபினட்டா சொல்ல முடியாது. காரணம், தமிழ்நாடு always, it appears Tamil was very well to do and many people came. For example, we know evidences from in 11th century in Rajendra Cholan, when he went to all the way to Gangetic region, he brought a big army. He recruited army from there. He brought them to Kumbakonam area. அவங்களுக்கு தனியா கும்பகோணத்து பக்கத்துல that village name is ஆரிய படை வீடு. நீங்க இப்ப கூட கூகுள் மேப்ல பார்க்கலாம். நான் ஒரு தடவை போனேன்.
படை இருக்கு, ஆரிய படை ஊர்னு பேரு. கரெக்ட்.
அங்க போய் நான் பானேன் ஒரு 15 வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னாடி. அங்க இருக்கவங்களாம் நம்ம மாதிரி தான் இருக்கிறாங்க, பெங்கால்ல இருந்து வந்தாங்க மாதிரியே இல்ல. காரணம் they would have mixed locally. Now that was established by Rajendra Cholan in 11th century, and to house the mercenaries he recruited when he went into the Gangetic region. So that is an indication of how they probably spoke some other language when they came originally 900 years ago, they won't know any other language other than Tamil and probably English. இல்லையா?
Thank you, ஐயா.
நம்மளுடைய ஜெனடிக் லீனியேஜ் தெரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்கு பிளட் சாம்பிளோ அல்லது பக்கல் ஸ்மியர் அல்லது இந்த ஸ்மியர் எடுக்கிறோம்ல பக்கல் ஸ்மியர் அது மாதிரி எடுத்து தெரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்கான வாய்ப்பு இங்க வந்து லேப் வசதி தமிழ்நாட்டில் இருக்கா, இந்தியாவில் இருக்கா?
இருக்குங்க. இது மதுரை காமராஜ் யூனிவர்சிட்டியில இது ஒரு இது RMRL இன்வைட் பண்ணியிருந்தாங்க. குமரேசன் ஒருத்தர் இருக்காரு. அதான் முன்னாடி வந்து பச்சையப்பன் ஒருத்தர் இருந்தார். அவர் தான் இந்த ஹெட் ஆஃப் த லேப். அவர் ரிட்டையர் ஆயிட்டாரு. இந்த போட்டிருக்க ஸ்லைடு அவருடைய இதுதான், ரிசர்ச் தான். அந்த இடத்துல இப்போ குமரேசன் ஒருத்தர் இருக்காருன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். ஹீஸ் இன் சார்ஜ் ஆஃப் தட். அண்ட் அந்த லேப் collaborates with Professor Reich's lab at Harvard University. That is one possibility. The other one is CCMB in Hyderabad. Anga Thangaraj, Nambur Alda. He has done pivotal work in characterizing Andamanese population and many rich work. And he has a lab. He's done some ancient genomic work too. There is one more lab in Lucknow area, I think.
Deccan College of Engineering. No, Lucknow. I am talking about the Deccan College of Engineering, Pune.
No, I don't think they have that capability. But this was established not too long ago because they have written papers, and of course they say that they do that work there. But I don't know whether they have extracted ancient genome. But they can do genome of anybody. I mean, that is a very standard thing. It's almost like going to a store and buying a T-shirt, because you can order microarray for your particular genome that you're interested in, and somebody will make it and ship it to you, and within about 2 weeks you can find out what your Y haplogroup is. So it is pretty much automated. Software is all available, so it's a pretty straightforward thing. People who were doing this 20 years ago, they had to do a lot of work, but now you don't have to be an expert to do all of that. It's a fairly straightforward procedure, not a too complicated procedure.
It's very complicated. Sorry for the interruption, Aya. Dr. Sundar has sent you some personal message. Can you please look at it? Rajaya.
Go ahead.
Dr. Sundar has sent you a personal message. Can you please look at it?
Oh. Oh. Yeah, he talked about SOV. George Hart would say that's an adoption of Dravidian linguistic features into Sanskrit. But that doesn't run all the way through, but there are features of Dravidian linguistic features in Sanskrit.
Okay.
ஐயாவுக்கு எனக்கு ஒரு வேண்டுகோள், இந்த உரையை நீங்க வந்து தமிழ்ல ஒரு தடவை கொடுத்தீங்கன்னா தமிழ் பேசும் மக்களுக்கு உதவியா இருக்கும்னு நினைக்கிறேன்.
பண்ணிட்டா போச்சு.
மகிழ்ச்சிங்க, நன்றிங்க.
ஆமா, தமிழ் மரபறக்கட்டளை அதை பத்தி யோசிச்சுட்டு இருக்கேன். ஐயாவை கூப்பிட்டு தமிழ்ல இந்த உரைய செய்ய வைக்கலாம் அப்படின்ட்டு ஐயாட்ட பேசிட்டு ஒரு டேட் வச்சுட்டா தமிழ் மரபறக்கட்டளையோடைய திசைகூடல் அப்படிங்கிற எங்களுடைய நிகழ்ச்சியில ஐயாவை பேச வைக்கலாம். ராஜ், எனக்கு இன்னும் 3 கொஸ்டின்ஸ் இருக்கு. ஒன்று வந்து நம்ம லாஸ்ட் டைம் வந்து வி டாக்ட் அபவுட் ஆதிச்சநல்லூர். அந்த ஆதிச்சநல்லூர் ஸ்கெல்ஸை வச்சுட்டு பார்க்கும்போது ஆதிச்சநல்லூர் வாஸ் அ காஸ்மோபாலிட்டன் சிட்டி அப்படிங்கிற மாதிரி எல்லா ரேஸும் வந்து ரெப்ரசன்டேஷன் அங்க இருந்திருக்கு. அதை பத்தி மேல் விவரங்கள் ஏதாவது நமக்கு கிடைக்குமா, இல்ல வந்து அப்ப கொடுத்த அந்த ரிசல்ட் மட்டும்தான் இருக்கா?
யாரோ ஒருத்தர் கேள்வி கேட்டிருக்காங்களே.
ஆமா, அவங்களும் கேட்டிருக்காங்க.
அது முதல்ல பதில் சொல்லிட்டு அப்புறம் கண்ணனுக்கு.
ஓகே.
Pixel 7 நீங்க உங்களோட கேள்வி கேட்றீங்களா? Can you please ask your question?
My name is Ananta Krishnan. என்னுடைய question வந்து relates to that Rakigiri sample. I know, Raj, you told me that the genome indicates there is no connection between the pastoral Middle Eastern people and people in the Indus Valley. But my question is, I always thought the agricultural people learned agricultural things only from the people in the Fertile Crescent. So now I think we need more samples in Indus Valley to indicate that agriculture was indigenously created. Do you think that line of thinking is okay?
No, that is how a scientist would approach it. That is absolutely correct. More data will be far more confirming. That is correct. In fact, the language in the paper is that the folks that particular lady was a combination of ancient genome of India, which is Andamanese as being a representative. By the way, they tried with various different ancient genomes. They found the best fit to the genome from the Andaman Islands. And the hunter-gatherers from Iran, they didn't find any element of relationship with the so-called the crescent, the Fertile Crescent or the Mesopotamian area, or and it wasn't due to later Iranian farmers. Until 2019, the major narrative was the farming came to Indus Valley via Iran. And I think Shinde's paper indicates that may not be the case, but he also points out more data would be helpful. That is correct. Now, if you read papers in this area about 20 years ago, most people will say farming was invented literally in the Fertile Crescent, and then it spread. And now the scholars would say it was invented in many different places, not just at Crescent. So that change took place because of emerging new evidences that has come to the fore in the last 20 years.
What is the age? What is the time span of the Rakigiri skeleton? Would you say it's about 2,500?
It was 2500 BC. They gave a range of 23 to 28. I put a number as 2500 BC. They didn't get it direct. They tried to get the carbon dating from the skeleton itself. They were not successful, but they were able to get it from stratigraphy of that being, they ranged from 2300 to 2800, something like that. And they bracketed it. They gave a bracket. They didn't give a precise number.
Yeah, I think carbon dating is kind of very difficult for anything over 1,000 years. I'm not sure.
No, that's not the case. The 10,000 years and older becomes a little bit more complicated. But okay. I'm not sure you're aware, but the emergence of what is known as a
nuclear.
No, we still use C14, C13 will be, you have a way of molecular filtering. You can have C14 is of a different mass compared to a C12. So if you accelerate it, the one will accelerate more than the other. So you can molecularly separate it and then measure. So you don't need a very high number, but you just need a smaller number compared to what it was, say, 15 years ago. It's known as accelerated mass spec or something like that. I know Institute at Bombay has one, but I'm not aware of others having it. It's an add-on to a traditional mass spec, which enables you to deal with extremely low concentrations of carbon C13, C14, and C12.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
அதுக்கு முன்னாடி வந்து இந்த இன்ஸ்டிடியூட் நேம் வந்து சுகவனம் ஐயா வந்து சொல்லியிருக்காங்க. இந்த பிர்லா பீர்பால் சஹானி இன்ஸ்டிடியூட் ஆஃப் வேல்யூ சயின்சஸ் லக்னோ. இதுதான் நீங்க சொல்லணும்னு நினைச்சீங்களா ஐயா? The Birbal Sahani Institute of Paleo Sciences.
Right, that is correct.
Okay.
ஐயா வணக்கம். அங்க பேராசிரியர் பா மார்த்தகை அப்படிங்கிற நம்ம தமிழ்நாட்டை சேர்ந்தவர், கன்னியாகுமரி மாவட்டத்தை சேர்ந்தவர், விஞ்ஞானியா பணிபுரிகிறார். அவரையும் இந்த மாதிரியான ஒரு கூட்டத்துல பங்கேற்க வைக்கணும்னு கேட்டுக்கிறேன். நன்றி.
அதெல்லாம் பாமா கையில தான் இருக்குது.
அரசையா கையில 2 பேரும் சேர்ந்து முயற்சி பண்றோம். நீங்க ஓகே. கண்ணனையா நீங்க சொல்லுங்க.
ஆமா, என்னுடைய கேள்வி வந்து 2-3 கேள்வி. முதல் கேள்வி வந்து ஆதிச்சநல்லூர் பத்தி, அதுல ஏதாவது இருக்கா அப்படின்னு. ஏன்னா இந்த ஆதிச்சநல்லூர் இப்ப இந்த இண்டஸ் வேலி அதோட ஏதாவது கம்பேரிசன்ஸ் நடந்திருக்கா? வந்து ஒரே மாதிரி பீப்புளா இல்ல அவங்க எல்லாம் டிஃப்ரெண்டா? அவங்க அதை பத்தி ஏதாவது மேல் விவரம் கிடைக்குதா? அது ஒண்ணு. அதுக்கப்புறம் நான் அடுத்த கேள்விக்கு வரேன்.
ஓகே, அந்த வந்து ரீஸ் REA அவருடைய ரிப்போர்ட் வந்து written almost 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. He looks at the skeletons and then says there were people of different descent and put in there in his report. So the suggestion was that that was a trade complex. People from different parts of the world came there. That is all we have at the moment. I don't think any genetic analysis has been done. If it is, it would have been only in the recent time, and I haven't seen that. I think there's a lot of interest in trying to do that. Maybe Madurai Kamaraj University might take this up. I do not know what the status of that is. So, and they've also excavated few more skeletons from near Kiradi, right? So that is also subjected to analysis. They're collaborating, I believe, with Reich's lab, and so there might be something that's coming to the fore in the near future.
Sure.
Good. The other question is about, I'm interested in man watching, and after going abroad and coming back to India, my passion is to watch people, and the variety of faces what I see in Tamil Nadu. These differences in the spatial features of Tamil Nadu, is it due to the longevity of the genome that existed from Virumandi's time and then mutations, and these mutations expressed itself that way, or does it mean genetic mixing with Aryans and East Asians and other people? Because I see a lot of actually East Asian features. கொஞ்சம் சப்பமுக்கா இருக்கிறது வந்து இந்தோனேஷியன்ஸ் மாதிரியும் இல்லாட்ட வந்து மலேசியன்ஸ் மாதிரியும் நிறைய மலேசியன் ஃபேஸ் இருக்கு. இது வந்து இஸ் இட் பிகாஸ் ஆஃப் ஜெனடிக் மிக்சிங் இல்லாட்ட வந்து டியூ டு மியூட்டேஷனா? எது காரணமா இருக்கும்?
I think I don't have a direct answer. I can only speculate because that is well beyond my understanding. I can say that your physiology adapts to the environment. So, for example, this is now established using molecular biology that the skin coloration is an adaptive response. There are also evidences that the early Europeans were darker in skin compared to later Europeans. And the prediction at that time, this was a science article, so it's got some validity. Australians some 5,000 years from now will be much darker than what they are now. And of course, there are evidences, if you've been in Europe, the Mediterraneans are much darker than people who live in Sweden, right? So there is an adaptive response that one can see. In India itself, you'll see people in South India having a darker skin compared to North Indians in general. And the skin color you'll see tribals who are extremely fair-skinned, and that's because they live in a northern climate. It could be a inherited character, but the response of your body biologically is an adaptive mechanism. And interestingly, the way the biology works is it's always experimenting, meaning it tries different things. That's why we still create babies that don't survive. And that is part of biology. And that is what has given rise to, evolutionarily given rise to a robust species such as Homo sapiens. And there are many other experiments that they did, like Denisovans and the other ancient hominins. They didn't survive because they weren't able to adapt. Now, it appears now, unlike the ancient man, we have technology, and so we could survive longer than other species because we have technology to use to protect ourselves. And that technology was not so widespread for the ancient man. The ancient man discovered farming to survive, but now we have other things with which we can support ourselves, right? So to some extent, the features of an individual has something to do with the way the environment in which you live. Having said that, there was a major project that was undertaken by New York City Department, which from the DNA fingerprint to construct the face of the criminal, because they can get DNA samples from crime scenes. And they've done a fair amount of work. There's one wonderful paper in that publication that came out in New York Times showing the difference between the prediction and the actual criminal. They were not very far off. They were not precise, but were not very far. I don't know how far they have pushed it, but in the parlance of the US code, that is now what they would call as managed evidence, not direct evidence. And therefore that won't be admissible in a court of law. And so that gave the police force additional linkages to search for evidences towards persecuting that particular criminal, right? So there is a school of people are working on that area too. I don't know how far it is progress. I'm talking about a 10-year-old story.
Yeah. The other point is the genetic mix. For example, the Toda population you showed, அதுல ஒரு couple நல்ல செக்கச்சவேன்னு ஒரு couple இருக்காங்க. That's definitely an Aryan gene, right?
Possibly, could be Mesopotamian. J2 is not an Aryan gene.
Oh, sorry, Mesopotamian.
J2 will be Middle East.
Okay, right. And that brings to this other question. Now, Germany, one of the German Indologists was giving a talk stating that the Indo-Aryan languages, the German, the English, and Dutch, they derive from Sanskrit. After the question, that argument whether Sanskrit has from India spread to Europe, or we picked up Sanskrit from Europe to India.
That's an easy question to answer. The reason is a tremendous amount of research has gone into it. It is not correct to say German came from Sanskrit. On the other hand, they are very distant cousins, if you will. So there was a mother language, they call it as Proto-Indo-European. They have now labeled the region where it has come from. And out of that emerged Vedic Sanskrit. And then in 4th century BCE, it became the Panini Sanskrit. And so the evolution of Sanskrit during that period. Professor George Hart has shown a fair amount of work on this, how Sanskrit absorbs features of linguistic features of, for example, one example that is very well established is the retroflex phonemes are absent in the early strata of Vedic Sanskrit, but it's present in Panini Sanskrit. And George Hart would argue it is a borrowing of that retroflex phonemes from Proto-Tamil. And so even Sanskrit is not pure. Of course, people will claim it is pure, but it absorbs features of other. Every language will absorb features from other languages because that is the nature of languages, right? So they had the same mother, but they are two different children, if you will. Two children that grew up at different parts of the world.
So, can we say that the Sanskrit was developed in India, or was it developed in the Middle East?
Well, it was developed in current-day Pakistan, and because Panini was supposed to have lived somewhere not far from Rawalpindi, of course they don't claim it to be their ancient language, right? And of course, in India, there's a concept of that was part of the greater India, So it is in the northwestern end of it, at the border with Afghanistan, is where Panini was supposed to have lived, according to literature evidences that people have discovered. And his time is thought to be 4th to 5th century BCE. And people who are very knowledgeable about Sanskrit and linguistic features can make a distinction between Vedic Sanskrit and later Sanskrit, because they would say they are quite far apart. Grammatically, they're quite far apart. I'm not an expert in this field. I'm now speculating summarizing what others have said. They're very, very different languages.
So, since we are talking about Indus Valley civilization, my question is how much of genetic evidence we have that the Indus Valley people have migrated to south and occupying the present Tamil Nadu? Because if you look at Tolkappiyam வந்து தமிழ்நாடுக்கு வந்து வடவேங்கடத்துல இருந்து தென்குமரி வரைக்கும் அதைத்தான் சொல்லுது வந்து தமிழர்களுடைய நிலப்பரப்பு அப்படின்னு. It doesn't talk about Indus Valley இருந்து வந்த அந்த மாதிரி சொல்றேன். நமக்கு தெரியும் இந்த குரூப்லயே வந்து புருஷோத்தம் அவன் சொல்றாரு இங்க இருந்து தான் அங்க போச்சு அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு குரூப் சொல்லிருக்காரு. தமிழ் வந்து ஒரிஜினலா இங்கேதான் டெவலப் ஆகி தமிழ்நாட்டுல டெவலப் ஆகி. So if you say that the current Tamils are kind of அவங்க வந்து இண்டஸ் வேலியில இருந்து வந்தவங்க அப்படின்னா எவ்வளவு தூரம் ஜெனடிக் எவிடன்ஸ்? நீங்க சொல்ற மாதிரி we are all very different people. இப்ப இருக்கக்கூடிய மக்களோட இண்டஸ் வேலி people கம்பேரே பண்ண முடியாது. They are more African. Then we are more Caucasoid. So how do we relate this?
Well, Tamil's சொல்ல முடியாது, but I think most scholars, perhaps not in India, but certainly Western scholars, think about the Indus Valley people having spoken a language that is very closely related to Dravidian languages. And part of I think they provide 2 or 3 evidences. One of the evidences, the linkage, the close linkages with Elamites. One thing that might be worthwhile for all of us to read is there's something known as McAlpin's hypothesis. He published this in around 1981. He passed away just 2 years ago. And his hypothesis is there's a larger group of language known as Zagros group of languages, which is Zagros is a mountain region where the Elamite people lived. And at the outskirts was the Indus Valley. They had the same language. And he provides Brahui, which currently exists in Pakistan, Afghanistan area, which is a Dravidian language, a northern Dravidian language group. He provides as an evidence. And then he looks at Gujarati and Marathi, and also Professor Southwood from U of Penn has done Faramado. He's published a book on this. And the linkages of linguistic features of Dravidian languages in Marathi and Gujarati. And these arguments in total supports the argument of people speaking in Indus Valley as Proto-Dravidian, if you will. And of course, we have L is approximately 10% of Tamil Nadu population, 10 to 15%. And you'll see L along the way, along the coast. And so the paper that was published about 6 months ago that looked at the migration of haplogroup L using the ancient genome that the Indus Valley were haplogroup L. There were speculations about it, but there is a more concrete evidence based on ancient genomic data that people from Zagros region did come strongly in contact with people in Indus Valley. So that is the connection, sort of a weak link. Perhaps a lot more work needs to be done. Unfortunately, Elamite language, we have only about a small amount of writing. Although the language went extinct 2,000 years ago, their inscriptions, there are only about small number of inscriptions, but they were always feudatories to the Mesopotamians. So they were forced to write their language in cuneiform, not in their own script, but they did write in their own script. And that connectivity has to be built in. I don't know whether that'll be possible because the amount of data that's available is so little, right? So to prove one language is related to another is a fair amount of work. There are many different things one needs to look at.
Yeah, because the concept here in Tamil Nadu is that Kali Telungum, Tulu, இது எல்லாமே கன்னடா இது எல்லாம் தமிழ்ல இருந்து தான் வந்தது. அதாவது இட்ஸ் கொஸ்டின் ஆஃப் தமிழ் பிளஸ் சம்ஸ்கிருதம். சம்ஸ்கிருதம் எவ்வளவு தூரம் மிக்ஸ் ஆகுதோ அதுக்கேற்ற மாதிரி மலையாளம் இருக்குன்னா மலையாளம் நிறைய சம்ஸ்கிருதம் மிக்சிங் இருக்கு. ஸோ இந்த திராவிடியன் லாங்குவேஜஸ்ல தமிழ்ல மட்டும் தான் வந்து இந்த இன்ஃப்ளூயன்ஸ் ஆஃப் சான்ஸ்கிரிட் இஸ் மினிமல் அப்படின்றது. அப்போ வந்து இது பிரான்ச் ஆஃப் ஃப்ரம் தமிழ் அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு கான்செப்ட் இருக்கு. ரெண்டாவது வந்து தமிழ்நாட்டில் வந்து இந்த கரண்ட் இது என்னன்னா அவங்களுக்கு வந்து தமிழ்ங்கிறது எங்க இருந்தோ வந்து மிடில் ஈஸ்ட்ல இருந்து வந்ததுன்னு சொல்றத வந்து அவங்களால ஏற்றுக்க முடியாம ஒரு சூழல் இருக்கு. ஸோ அது என்ன நினைக்கிறீங்க?
Well, எப்படி சொல்றேன், the linguists, scholars in the field, I'm not, இது வந்து இந்த ஃபீல்டு வந்து linguistic features நான் படிக்கிறது most of them are research papers. அவங்க எப்படி டிவைட் பண்றாங்கன்னா northern Dravidian, middle Dravidian and southern Dravidian சொல்றாங்க. And there are features that are different within this class. That's on a linguistic plane. Linguistic plane, what I mean is they don't just look at few words here and there, but also sentence structure. The sandhin sollamna, how you modify the verb, how you modify the noun, and how two words come together. முதல் கட்டம் முதற் கட்டம்னு நம்ம இந்த சேர்த்துக்கிறோம் இல்லையா, சந்தி, இந்த மாதிரியான ஃபீச்சர்ஸ்லாம் இதுல இருக்குதா அதுல இருக்குதா, அது டீட்டெயிலா ஒரு நிறைய இது பண்ணுவாங்க. அந்த டீட்டெயில் அனாலிசிஸ் பண்ணும்போது இதெல்லாம் கொஞ்சம் எந்த காலத்துல இந்த மாதிரி நடந்ததுன்றத ஒரு மாதிரி எஸ்டிமேட் பண்றாங்க. ஃபார் எக்ஸாம்பிள், தெலுங்குல the most ancient writing you get is about 10th century AD. And in Kannada, like 5th century AD, Malayalam and Tamil are pretty much the same language, except for a large amount of Sanskrit influence. And Nala, Telugu is considered middle part of India, central part of India, while Tamil and Malayalam to be the southern part. And then Malayalamna, you have the non-peninsular Dravidian language, Brahui. And Professor Southwood has written an article about Brahui and its relationship to Dravidian languages. And so there are different linguistic features that enable you to classify these languages. Now,
ராஜ், ஒரு 10 minutes முடிச்சுக்கலாமா?
முடிச்சுக்கலாமா? கேள்வி இருக்குதாங்களா? மத்த கேள்வி
ராஜா அதோட முடிச்சுக்கலாம்.
So let me complete this sentence.
Okay.
And therefore, the methods of linguistics, I'm not entirely sure that everybody uses. Now we're used to listening to the common media and some news media, if you will. They don't go into depth, and therefore cursorily wrong information gets passed on. So there are features that one can look at it in a very careful way. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mr. Raja, you may ask your question.
ராஜா கொஸ்டினோட முடிச்சுக்கலாம்.
Thank you, ma'am. Vanakkam, Professor. Anevarkum vanakkam. My question is about the linguistic aspect of Tamil, or going backwards. For example, for instance, I found there are too many words in Tamil that are similar to those in Finnish and Estonian. Finnish and Estonian belong to the Uralic language family or the Finno-Ugric language family, as we know. So, for example, Vargana, Tamil la Vargana, Estonian la Ilagu, Finnish la Ilakun. அதே மாதிரி தமிழ்ல அனிமலுக்கு விலங்கு. இதுல வந்து இது பின்னிஷ்ல வந்து மாத்தி சொல்லிட்டேன். பின்னிஷ்ல இலக்குன் அண்ட் தமிழ்ல விலங்கு, அந்த மாதிரி நிறைய வார்த்தை. கப்பு வந்து குப்பி, பின்னிஷ்ல குப்பி. இதே மாதிரி பின்னிஷ், எஸ்டோனியன் பிளஸ் ஹங்கேரியன் அதெல்லாம் சேர்த்தா நம்ம திராவிட மொழிகளை சேர்த்தா நிறைய வார்த்தைகள் அதே மாதிரி இருக்கு. So is there any link between the Uralic language family and the Dravidian language family? And if so, how far back does it go? And where is the probable meeting point or origin of the common words between these two, building on Dr. David McAlpin's Elamo-Dravidian language hypothesis?
Well, I wrote a very short note in our WhatsApp group as to how to compare one language and another, if they are related or not. It's a little bit more complex. We'll be glad to send you that little snippet, about 10 points that one might consider. But
today, Mani Ayya had made a Facebook post on that. Let me share that link here.
So, ஷார்ட்டா சொன்னோம்னா, அந்த புக்கை எடுங்கன்னு சொல்றேன் நான். புக்கு ஆங்கில வார்த்தை சொல், மீதி எல்லாம் தமிழ் வார்த்தை. அதனால nouns will go from one language to another just like that. அது வேர்ட்ஸை மட்டும் பார்த்தீங்கன்னா ஒரு வித பிரயோஜனமும் இருக்காது. ரெண்டாவது, செகண்ட் இம்பார்ட்டன்ட் திங் இஸ் சின்டாக்ஸ். தமிழ் வந்து சப்ஜெக்ட், ஆப்ஜெக்ட், வேர்புன்னு வரும். நான் பள்ளிக்கு சென்றேன்னு. அந்த ஃபீச்சர்ஸ் இருக்கான்னு பார்க்கணும். யூரோப்பியன் லாங்குவேஜஸ்ல யூ வில் நாட் see that. I went to school. Verb is given dominance. So now in தமிழ்ல வந்து வார்த்தைகளை சேர்த்துடலாம், சந்தின்னு சொல்லுவோம் இல்லையா ஒரு விதத்துல. அது அங்கு சென்று வந்தேன், சென்று ஒரு வேர்ப், வந்தேன் இன்னொரு வேர்ப், இடையில ஒன்றும் கிடையாது. ஆனா இங்கிலீஷ்ல ஒன்னா ஐ வெண்ட் அண்ட் கேம், அண்டு தேவையில்லைன்னா அதுக்கு மீனிங்கே இருக்காது. இந்த மாதிரி ஃபைனர் ஃபீச்சர்ஸை வச்சு தான் நீங்க அனலைஸ் பண்ணணும். நீங்க வந்து வார்த்தைகளை மட்டும் வச்சு ஒண்ணுமே சொல்ல முடியாது. Words, nouns, typically nouns go from one to the other. So அதை வந்து முக்கியமா மனசுல வச்சுக்கணும் இந்த மாதிரி லாங்குவேஜை கம்பேர் பண்ணும்போது.
இன்ட்ரெஸ்டிங். ஏன்னா நான் ஃபின்லாண்ட்ல ஒரு மாசம் இருந்தேன். ஐ அப்சர்வ் தி சேம் திங். ஃபினிஷுக்கும் தமிழுக்கும் உள்ளது. அந்த உரால் ஆல்டைக் லாங்குவேஜஸ்ல வந்து they bring in even Korean and Japanese. நம்மளுடைய கனெக்ஷன்ஸ் வந்து மோஸ்ட் ப்ராபப்லி ஹங்கேரியன், தென் ஃபினிஷ், அதுக்கு அந்த பக்கத்துல இருக்கிற லட்வியா, இந்த லாங்குவேஜஸ்லாம் தே ஆர் ரிலேட்டட். அதோட தமிழ் எங்கேயோ போய் கனெக்ட் ஆகுது. அது என்னன்னு இன்னும் we need detailed research on that.
Okay.
Because
the question towards ஆயிடுச்சுங்க ரொம்ப. அதனால யூடியூப்ல கேட்கறவங்களுக்கும் சலிப்பாயிரும். இந்த கொஸ்டின் கூட முடிச்சுக்கோங்க. நன்றி.
Okay, I just wanted to mention that the root words appear very similar. For example, the words for tree, animal, cup, and the மாதிரி ரொம்ப basic words. அதாவது நீங்க civilization எடுத்தீங்கன்னா the first words that are formed வந்து like அம்மா, அப்பா, அதெல்லாம் கூட very very similar between the Uralic languages and the Dravidian languages, especially between Finnish and Estonian and Tamil. That's the thing. And there are hundreds of words that are very similar between Finnish and Tamil. So there must be some kind of link, if not from a common ancestor, some kind of contact between the two at a very, very early time between the Elamo-Dravidian and Finno-Greek or Uralic. That area that must be researched more, I guess.
Yes, I believe that. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Muthuswamy Senthilnathan, you had a question at the start of the presentation.
முடிஞ்சதுன்னா அதை நம்ம இதுல வாட்ஸ்அப்ல கூட அனுப்பலாம், இல்லைன்னா அதை கடைசி கேள்வியா வச்சுக்கலாமா?
ஆமா, அவரை
சரி, சொல்லுங்க. அவர் கன்க்ளூடிங் ரிமார்க்ஸ் வந்து ராஜ் சொல்லட்டும்.
ஓகே, மிஸ்டர் முத்துசுவாமி.
இல்ல பரவாயில்லைங்க, நான் மறுபடியும் ஐயாட்ட தனியா, எனக்கு மோர் பர்சனல் தான்.
லவுடா பேசுறீங்களா?
கேட்கலீங்க.
He said he will talk to you directly, Ayya.
Okay.
Good.
முடிச்சுக்கலாங்க.
Thank you.
Raj, concluding remarks.
Okay. Thanks for listening to my long-winded talk.
Thank you.
And my wife would say long-winded answers.
No. Thank you, Bama, and thank you, Dr. Bama and Dr. Arasu Chelliya.
நன்றிங்க.
எல்லாருக்கும் ரொம்ப நன்றி.
நன்றிங்கம்மா.
Thank you very much, doctor.
வணக்கம்.
இது வந்து நமக்கு தெரியும், இது ஒரு ஹியூஜ் டாபிக். இதை வந்து ஒரு டாக்ல ஒன்றும் ஒரு தெரிஞ்சுக்கலாம், லேசா தெரிஞ்சுக்கலாம். ப்ராபப்லி ராஜ் வில் அக்ரி, ஸ்கிராச் சர்ஃபேஸ் மாதிரி தான். நீங்க வாட்ஸ்அப் குழுமத்துல இணைஞ்சவங்க நீங்க தயவு செய்து கருத்துக்களை பகிர்ந்துங்க. சயின்ஸ் பேஸ்ட் நம்ம முடிஞ்ச அளவுக்கு நாலேஜ் தெரிஞ்சுக்கணுங்கிறது தான். இப்படித்தான் இருக்கணுங்கிற ஒரு முடிவோட நம்ம போகல. ராஜுக்கு வந்து இவ்வளவு அருமையா ப்ரிப்பேர் பண்ணி வந்ததுக்கு ராஜுக்கு ரொம்ப, ராஜ் முத்தரசனுக்கு ரொம்ப நன்றி. அதே மாதிரி பாமா அவர்கள் ரொம்ப நன்றி. நம்ம ஆர்எம்ஆர் ரோஜா முத்தையா ரிசர்ச் லைப்ரரி அவங்க டாக்டர் சுந்தர், அப்புறம் சுபு, மனமார்ந்த நன்றிகள். பாமா நீங்க சொல்லுங்க, ஃபைனல் கமெண்ட் சொல்லுங்க.
ரொம்ப நல்லா இருந்தது. இந்த 2 செஷனுமே வந்து நமக்கு நீங்க சொன்ன மாதிரி இட்ஸ் அன் இன்ட்ரடக்ஷன் டு த ஜெனெட்டிக்ஸ் ஃபீல்ட். அண்ட் அதில் வந்து வி ஹவ் லேர்ன்ட் லைக் டிப் ஆஃப் அன் ஐஸ்பர்க் மாதிரி வி ஹவ் லேர்ன் சம்திங். ஸோ வி ஹாவ் டு கண்டினியூ ஃபர்தர் ஆன் திஸ். அது இப்போ சுகம்னம் ஐயா சொன்ன மாதிரி அவங்களையும் கூப்பிட்டு பேச வைக்கலாம். ஹி மென்ஷன் அபவுட் அ ப்ரொஃபஸர் இன் லக்னோ. ஸோ அவங்களையும் கூப்பிட்டு பேச வைக்கலாம். ப்ரொஃபஸர் தங்கராஜ் இவங்கெல்லாம் வந்து தே ஆர் த பயோனியர்ஸ் ஆஃப் திஸ் ஃபீல்ட். ஸோ மேபி with Rajaya's base being said, we can have more experts talk in this one and try to understand the genetic heritage of current day Tamils.
Thank you. Right, definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
அதாவது ஒரு பலத்த கைதை தட்டி நம்ம ராஜுக்கு பாராட்டுங்க.
ரொம்ப தேங்க்ஸ் ஃபார் பீயிங் பேஷண்ட் டு லிசன் டு மை டாக்.
யூடியூப் லிங்க் ஷேர் பண்ணுங்க. நண்பர்களுக்கு, ஆர்வமுள்ள நண்பர்களுக்கு பகிர்ந்துங்க. கருத்து பரிமாறுவோம். இதுல வாட்ஸ்அப் குரூப்ல கருத்து பரிமாறி. நன்றி.
ராஜயா, இந்த ஸ்லைடையும் நீங்க வாட்ஸ்அப் குரூப்ல போட்டுருவீங்க இல்லைங்களா?
போட்டுருமா.
ரொம்ப தேங்க்யூ.
ஓகே,
தேங்க்யூ வெரி மச்.
நன்றிங்க. நன்றி.
Your knowledge is very good. எல்லாரும் போயிட்டாங்களா?